Omar Hamoui from Sequoia, Aileen Lee from Cowboy Ventures, James Slavet from Greylock, Danny Reimer from Index Ventures, and our co-editor, Matthew Panzarino.
This is a very...
All right. Oh, my microphone's live this time. That's great.
What do you do with the pillow?
Okay, guys. Let's talk about some stuff. First of all, welcome. Welcome to the stage, everybody. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to do this a little bit. That way I can see everybody. All right. So there's a lot of things we could talk about, but one of the things I think is really interesting right now is this sort of this issue we have with hiring engineers in the Valley. It's becoming so easy. I use easy in quotations because it's a grade, but it's becoming so easy for people to get funded, get money, start their own thing. The tools are there, the money is readily available in general. So what happens when it's easier to start a company and get funding than it is to hire an engineer?
So I'll take it. Pause. Look, I think, so one, I think, paradoxical but important approach for a CEO running a company in this environment is you have to recognize that the people who are working for you, the best people who will work for you, probably will at some point want to start their own company. And so you have to actually be focused on how you actually help them to accomplish their goals and be great, as opposed to just like filling a role in your company. So I actually have a story on this. I recently, I'm on the board of a company called Redfin, and Glenn, who's the CEO of Redfin, asked me to come give a talk at the company to his engineering and product team around how to start a company. Like the initial thought on having someone come in and do that to your team is basically like asking someone to come like train your girlfriend like how to meet guys in a bar, right? But again, the paradoxical part of it is if you want to actually attract and keep awesome people, you need, who are really entrepreneurial, you have to make them, make them feel and also back up that you are going to support them to accomplish what they want to accomplish in their careers.
So if you were looking at the companies that are out there right now, obviously there's kind of a grouping of companies that are relatively hot. What do you think the dream job for an engineer is right now? I mean, you can answer one of your portfolio companies, I don't care, but if you had to pick one, what would it be? What do you think the right place for an engineer that wants to work at a company, not start their own thing yet, where would that be?
I mean, I think, I guess what I would say is I think it depends on what the engineering is looking for, and I mean, a lot of the job of a venture capitalist is to be a recruiter and to be a headhunter. And I think in many different cases, it depends on how early and how much responsibility the engineer wants. And are they going to be thinking about having more of a specific role in a more mature company, or do they want to have a more not impactful, but more defining role in terms of the culture by joining an earlier company? So, if you're joining, a company like Etsy right now, it's very different than joining a company like Good Eggs right now. They're both phenomenally interesting roles as an engineer, but you're going to have different priorities that are enmeshed in what you're doing.
So let's shift the topic a little bit. A lot of the attention that comes from the press side of things right now is, based on the founders of companies kind of acting, like a little mini tyrants. Sometimes they say things that are pretty insensitive or can be deemed insensitive, or they have a complex about kind of the way that they handle their business, like it's very mercenary and very out there and very forward. So these kind of boy king founders, does that matter when you're talking to an investor, whether or not you choose to put your money there? Do you see that as like, this is going to be a problem down the road, or it doesn't matter because we want somebody that runs the company first? Or is it a factor in whether or not you invest?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the person you're investing in is one of the, or the team that you're looking to invest in is one of the key factors in making a decision. Because if you're, this is not just a state of you're trying to put your money somewhere and then walk away and then see what happens 5 years later. You are joining the team. You're trying to partner with the company and trying to work with this person. And so their demeanor, the way they run the business, whether you think they're ethical, whether you think they're going to be able to sort of accomplish the goals, whether you think they're driven, all those things factor in a lot. I think that those are primary topics of conversation when investment decisions are made.
What I would unpack here is I think there's a distinction between someone who might be difficult to work with, or some people might perceive that person as difficult to work with at certain times, and someone who's unethical. And so I think many great entrepreneurs can be difficult to work with. I mean, you have to have this incredible conviction and force of will to go out and make something happen. And I'm actually fine working with people who can be challenging to work with. I think that's the important distinction. I think the other sort of quality to look at is, most entrepreneurs who are successful are actually doing it for the first time. So you can't actually look and say, were they successful in the last company that they started? But you can actually understand if someone is self-aware, is open to feedback and learning, and is basically going to have like a compounded daily, weekly, monthly learning rate that enables the entrepreneur to scale.
And I think that's an area where actually investors in the board can help, where a lot of these companies, especially companies for a long time, don't have a head of HR, right? So some of the bad behavior maybe because they aren't really getting coaching and their first-time CEO. It's a bunch of young people who haven't really worked in a professional organization in the past, and coaches or investors or members of the board aren't necessarily giving them input on the kind of environment that they should be running, that's professional, that's going to attract a broad diversity of the best talent. And so I think that's probably an opportunity for the investor community to actually do a better job of giving input and setting expectations for some of these teams for like what's the best way to run a company.
I agree, because you have some young entrepreneurs and they'll hear this sort of tolerance and or promotion if people are difficult to work with. And I think you can create a situation where somebody who's not even difficult to work with is like, gee, maybe I should be more of a jerk because I'm like not doing this right. Like I need to be more aggressive. I need to be more rude. And given your first question of how hard it is to hire and retain people, it really isn't hard to just be a decent leader and a decent person. And I think like we should all kind of hope to look for that. I mean, look, there are some people that are harder than others, but in general, I think it's important that you be easy to work for.
So continuing on that culture front, when it comes time to invest in a company, do you guys consider social good components of a company, whether it contributes back to a larger number of the populace or whether it has a positive impact on, say, like carbon footprint or something like that? Do you count that as a factor? Is it one of your major checkpoints when you're considering investing in a company?
I'll start with that. I guess what we've come to realize is that it's actually, from a generational standpoint, we're actually seeing that millennials expect a social commitment and are looking for businesses that have social responsibility being integral to their business model to actually be interested in the businesses. And so I guess what we would say is we don't see them as being mutually exclusive, but actually the businesses that have social responsibility as part of the business model are likely to be the most successful businesses in their space. So I was mentioning Etsy before. I think the reason why Etsy has hit a nerve is because the customer wants to be able to help that maker make their vocation their career. Their passion becomes their vocation. And similarly with Good Eggs, we're seeing it with farmers, and we're seeing it with Patreon, where creators get backed by fans. So I suspect that this question is going to become less and less relevant over time, and it's just going to be part of most of these business models.
So if you're talking about cultural things in the Valley, there's definitely something that we need to talk about, and it's that there seems to be an overwhelming abundance of male founders versus female founders. And I don't think we need to kind of belabor that. It's pretty much a fact. So we don't need to talk about whether that's true, but I think the important question is, how do you make the environment more inviting, or what is responsible for that disparity? And how do we change that? I'm not asking to fix the thing on stage here, although that would be nice if you could do that. but I think that it's important to kind of think about why. And do you have any ideas of how that might be fixed?
I mean, I think it's, you know, there's a number of issues that contribute to it. I think fundamentally it starts with education around technology and engineering and other things that people care about in the Valley. I think also it has to do with the framing of the problem. I think a lot of times the problem is framed as almost like it's this, we need to do this good thing by bringing more women into the industry, or we're trying, you know, it's almost like it's some kind of something that
favor that's being done.
It's a favor, yeah, as opposed to something that's actually necessary because we will all benefit from it. Like we are all going to, there are actual business outcomes that happen that are negative by not having more women in these positions and starting these companies. Like there's a whole segment of society and all this value that could be created and brought to the ecosystem. And I think by looking at it as a real problem as opposed to it as you said, like a favor, it really will change the perception of people and what they're willing to do to fix it.
So I can talk about this for a long time, so you guys can stop me. I think there's a pretty broad spectrum of stuff that's happening in companies, from things at the extreme like harassment and gender pay gap, which are basically illegal, right? And I think that some people just don't realize that those things are actually illegal and put your company at legal risk. And then there's stuff kind of that's softer on the spectrum around culture and people feeling like they're not supported, or favoritism, or, you know, things that people say that are kind of unintended consequences of just feeling uncomfortable or not knowing what are the right things to say. And I feel like there's probably an opportunity for some kind of a training program or something to go into companies to both help them kind of audit where they are in terms of, like, do they have a fair environment? And how do they kind of unpack some of the bias stuff that goes on every day that creates a more uncomfortable environment for people who aren't like the majority of employees. But I feel like we don't really have the tools yet that we need. But I'm hoping that kind of the stuff that's coming out, because every day it feels like there's a new article and a new study or a new example of people who are like of bad stuff happening, that will, as a community, come together and figure out tools that can make more systemic change rather than kind of like an ice bucket challenge type thing, which I think is awesome for awareness, but maybe not actually like kind of create systemic change.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to say to that point is, I mean, to the point of sort of auditing, so we do a regular, audit of how many of our companies, of the 140 companies that we have women as leaders or founders, and we're at 15%, which is actually surprisingly high for the peer group, but it's a massive issue. And so what it's further amplified by, if you look at my portfolio, most of my customer are women. So there's like this massive disconnect. So part of it is obviously thinking, okay, can we find a partner that obviously could complement the work that we're doing? And obviously there are a lot of characteristics that make a partner, but that's something. The other one is sort of using those founders to support new founders and new entrepreneurs that we speak to. But yeah, I mean, it's clearly something that has to be increasingly addressed.
One observation we've had just inside Greylock, if I look at Greylock, we've been around as a firm for 50 years, a long time. If you look at actually the partnership of Greylock several decades ago, it was mostly white Protestant men, like in blue blazers. And if you look at like how just how the tech industry has evolved just over the last couple of decades, most of my partners are now Asian, Indian, and Jewish, which kind of mirrors actually some of what's happened in terms of...
But still male.
But still male, and this is my next point. So we talk about this issue a lot internally, because I do think the proportion of women who are founders and CEOs and the proportion of women who are venture capitalists, these two things are inextricably linked. So we definitely are talking about it. I think the point that Danny touched on, I think having a generation of companies where there are women CEOs and women founders that end up being billion-dollar, large successful outcomes, which is very much coming. I think with a higher percentage, I think is going to help contribute. Yep. So I think there are a lot of factors here, but it is a real issue.
I hope James is right. I feel like the power move will be for a high-profile, top-tier VC firm to announce 2 new female GPs. Not just 1, but 2. And I feel like that will happen, I hope that will happen in the next 2 or 3 years, and the question will be who will do it. Because I think that they will basically kind of get the most attention and the most kudos for making the biggest change sooner rather than later.
Cool. Well, I mean, I think we fixed all that, so it's all good for tomorrow. Okay, so if you, I mean, the easiest way to put this is how do you tell somebody that they're not a good founder? Somebody walks in, they give you their pitch, you know, you hear them out, and then they leave or whatever, and you think to yourself, they're not the right person. Maybe the idea is good, but you're not a good founder. Obviously, it's a sensitive situation. They come to you with hopes and dreams. So how do you tell them, don't do this? This is not right for you.
I feel like you were good at this.
I'd be good at delivering that message. Look, so what I would say is that typically what we see is that the most successful founders are product-oriented and very instinctual around the market opportunity that they're going after. So you think of like Tim Westergren from Pandora, like playing in a piano bar and struggling while he's developing this music experience on the side. So one thing that we typically are looking for is a product experience that emanates from a founder's experience and then a company that can emanate from the product. And so that is one thing that's a potential disconnect. With that said, I mean, there are companies that have actually started by folks who, like, on paper don't look like they're out of central casting that end up being really, really successful companies. One thing, I know several of the folks who are here invest a lot in marketplace businesses, right? If you look at some of the most successful marketplace businesses that are, they have founders who are actually not guys who've done it before or women who've done it before, not out of central casting, but one attribute they have is they're incredibly resilient, scrappy, aggressive, like willing to just like really run at it to make it happen because, for example, with a marketplace business, it's really hard to spin things up and get liquidity, and then once you do, it can be actually also really hard to kill your business. So I guess I'd say our reflex is there's sort of this product instinctual founder with the right background, but there are plenty of exceptions, and so I think we can't like
So are you talking about like funding the pivot? Basically, like, I believe that this person is scrappy enough to do this, that I would tell them no about this product, but I like them so much, I want them in my fold?
What I'm saying is, no, I'm not saying funding the pivot. I'm saying you could back somebody who has a great domain expertise and product orientation in the space they're going after, or you'll actually see situations where someone isn't out of central casting, but what they're doing is actually working. Because maybe the person is better than appears on the surface, or just has the right grit and determination and focus to actually make a business work.
Yeah, I guess first of all, a couple of things. I would say you should be able to tell someone who you're meeting with who is the founder and they're not a good founder in the meeting. You don't have to do a follow-up. I mean, if you can't help them in that meeting, then there's something wrong. The second one that gets difficult is that, in a lot of ways, in my case and probably in other folks' cases, there is no central casting for a founder because you're looking for people who are crazy enough to go after their life's mission with an entrepreneurial venture that has most chances to not succeed. So it's really difficult to find the pattern recognition. But if they're not clearly going to be successful as a founder, then it's quite obvious pretty quickly. And the idea is not enough to actually make a business succeed. And so all of a sudden, at least in my head, if the person is clearly of high caliber, high intellect, but not a founder, I'm going back to my headhunting sort of database of all the companies that I'm thinking through and pitching them, yeah, maybe you need a little more experience working with another company. Maybe you'd like to do that before you start on this, because here are the 5 reasons why this is not a great idea, or you're not ready to start that company.
I think it's dangerous to be that categorical to even think that somebody's not a good founder, like forever, because things change, ideas change, people change. I mean, speaking from my own experience, I probably wasn't a good founder in my first, second, third, but by the 5th one, which ended up being AdMob, turned out that worked out. But if along the way someone had just told me you're not a good founder on the 2nd one, where I probably sucked, maybe I would have just stopped trying. So I think it's actually, you might want to say not now, right? Or try doing this, or try going there,
Yeah.
or maybe one more job. But
Yeah.
like, not a good founder forever is, I think, a dangerous.
I agree, and I think it's rare. I'm trying to think of a founder who hasn't had bumps in the road.
Yeah.
And there's going to be multiple step functions of development for pretty much every leader. And I think, the board and the investors should have a close enough relationship with the founder to know what's going on inside the company and be able to have those conversations on a regular basis. So it's not like out of the blue, some like swoop and poop kind of a meeting where you're like, you walk in, you say you're doing a bad job. It has to be a constant dialogue of like, how are you doing? Where do you feel like you might have blind spots? Like, do you have a good enough team to complement you on the stuff that you don't want to spend time on or you are not as good at? And how are we going to help you develop? And that's, because I think that there's lots of examples of folks that I've worked with and like tech titans today who have not always seemed to be great founders, but they've wound up building great companies. But I think it's like, it doesn't just happen miraculously. You have to work on it.
Excellent. Well, we have 40 seconds left, so just really quickly, what's the top 2 most interesting companies that you're not currently invested in?
Top 2 most interesting companies? I would say Uber is definitely one of them. And I don't know, I'll have to think about the second one. Yeah.
Okay.
Uber and Theranos.
Top 2 that we're not currently invested in. I would say House and Nomi.
I'd probably say Airbnb, and what's another one? Docker.
Got another one for me?
No.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Ah.